Alright, first step of the pizza oven building process is laying the foundation. I use this rope to get a general idea of where I wanted it, build a simple wooden frame, clear all the stuff out of the way, remove the sod, and then pour the concrete. Nothing crazy here, pretty basic. I'm using a straight edge to rest the level on, check in both directions to make sure the frame's perfectly level, tamping the dirt down as best I can. I had a bunch of extra rocks and cinder blocks laying around, so figured I'd lay those in the bottom to take up some extra space to make sure I didn't run out of concrete. This step is optional. If you have enough concrete, you don't need to worry about it, but I didn't want to buy more than I needed. I did use the high strength 5000 psi concrete for this. You'd probably be able to get away with using just standard concrete, but I didn't want to take any chances. This stuff is double the cost, so if you're cheap and looking to save a couple bucks, you can just go with the standard stuff. You're definitely going to want to add steel reinforcement to the concrete foundation. I'm using this wire mesh here, cutting it to size and then just figuring out exactly how I'm going to lay it in there. And I did add rebar on top of it as well. This concrete mixer you see me using, I got off Amazon a couple years ago. I think it was like 120 bucks. Well worth it. If you plan on doing a lot of concrete work in your house, I highly recommend you just buy a small mixer like this, as opposed to renting one. It's going to be at least 50, 60, 70 bucks to rent one, and you're going to have to pay per day. You know, you do one large concrete project, this mixer will pay for itself. Highly recommended. You can only fit about one bag in it, but most of the work I do, I'm working by myself anyways, so I can only move so fast. For me, it's perfect. Nice and smooth. Ah. It takes concrete a couple weeks to fully cure, but in this case, you could just let it sit for a day or two, take the frame off, and then keep moving along in the process. It's not going to matter that much. It's cured enough to hold up the weight that you're about to put on it. So the next step is getting a layout marked so you know exactly where your cinder block foundation is going to start and end. And then before you start mixing mortar, it's always a good idea to do a dry stack, so you've got a pretty good idea of how these are going to fit together. I never laid a brick before in my life before making this, before starting this project, and I gotta tell you, it's pretty easy. There's not much to it. I'm sure there's professional masons and bricklayers out there that are going to critique how I'm doing this. But at the end of the day, you're not going to see any of this, and you're just, slopping some of this stuff on there and making it stick. So if you've never laid a brick before, don't think that this is an intimidating part of the process. It's very simple, and it's difficult to mess it up. Just mix up the mortar, slop it on, and start stacking. Let that cinder block foundation rest for a day before moving on to the next step here, which is prepping the concrete board, getting that cut to size, centering it on the foundation, and then prepping the form that you're going to need. The concrete slab that's going to sit on top of the cinder blocks, we're going to have to pour in place. It's going to be too heavy to lift, so we got to pour it in place. The concrete board is going to serve as the base, and then this mold rather, that I'm building is going to contain all the concrete. You can see here the corners are designed in a very specific way to fit together perfectly. And I also designed it in a way to allow a 1/2 inch lip around the perimeter so that concrete flows in there and you can't see the concrete board when you're looking at it. If you're going to cover this with stucco, it doesn't matter and this step is overkill. But if you had planned on just leaving it exposed concrete, you're good to go then, because you're not going to be able to see it. To set this in place, use a couple clamps. It's held in place by just screwing it up through the bottom. Screw your corners together and then run some screws straight up through the bottom, right into the concrete board. It doesn't matter if they stick through the concrete board because it's going to be covered with concrete, obviously. I just threw a strip of duct tape down the center so there's no leaks, and then what you're going to want to do is go around the entire perimeter here and fill all those gaps with either silicone or caulk. It really doesn't matter because it's all going to be covered. You're not going to see it. This is a good shot of the spacing on the bottom. And then if you use black silicone, you'll be able to see it better. But here I'm just using like water-based interior caulk. It really doesn't matter. This is just to prevent any leaking of the concrete. It's a good idea to throw some clamps and some scrap wood there to add some extra support. I'm not sure if it's fully necessary, but I was just playing it safe. Here you're using that same steel mesh, cutting it to size, laying it out, and then adding rebar on top. You spray the perimeter with some PAM, and that's going to help release once the concrete is cured. I'm using a reciprocating saw and a scrap piece of melamine board to hold up, just to add some vibration there to get some of the bubbles out. After a day or two, you could take the molds off, and this is dry enough to move on to the next step. The next thing we need to do is build the form that we're going to use to house the insulated cement mix. That's going to serve as an insulation layer below the actual pizza oven floor that our fire bricks are going to sit on. So we're going to mix up in a future step some perlite and cement, and then we're going to pour it in this form here. So once I cut this out, looking at it, it looked like the entrance was a little bit too long, so you'll see I had to clamp some scrap wood there to the front to kind of shorten it up. There's a couple different ways to make this form. This way was pretty simple, just using some scrap blocks of wood every couple inches or so, and then some thin flexible plywood to stretch around, and you're just nailing and screwing that in place. And then that's really all you need for your mold. The next thing we need to do is just take it outside, center it, mix up our insulated cement mix, and pour it in. Now, because I was too impatient to wait for my Amazon shipment of the giant bags of this perlite stuff to show up, I decided to go to Lowe's and buy a bunch of these smaller bags that ended up being like 3 or 4 times the cost. Do not do what I did. Just order all your supplies that you're going to need up front. I listed them all out in the plans I have available. You're going to mix this perlite and cement in whatever ratio you want. Most of the videos I watched recommended a 5-to-1 ratio, which is what I did here. I went on to regret it because I didn't feel it was strong enough, and then I did a 3-to-1 ratio. So you're going to have to use your own judgment on it. I recommend doing a 3-to-1 ratio because this is going to be supporting a lot of the weight of all the bricks on top. And as you can see here, I had to move on to a different step because I ran out of perlite, didn't have enough. This is going to turn out to be a disaster, which you're going to see in a little bit here. But I decided to do a stone veneer on the outside of my cinder blocks. If you wanted to save a couple $100, probably like $600, and a lot of time and effort, you could just cover these cinder blocks with stucco. I've never laid fake veneer stone like this before, so it took me a while to figure out the best way to do it. Turns out the biggest thing is you need to tap them in place with a hammer or a piece of wood or something. That tapping is going to create a seal, and it's really going to lock it in place. Another thing I regret, so I did some deliberate gaps in all these stones because I knew I was going to go back and fill the gaps with mortar because I kind of like the look of that. In hindsight, if I was to do this again, I would dry stack it all, meaning there's no gaps between the rocks.
All right, couple things I've learned doing these. If it's not sticking, your mud's probably too wet. Try a little drier mix. Also, the biggest tip is you need to tap it with a hammer or a piece of wood or something. I'm using a rubber mallet. I was using a wood mallet before, but I was cracking some of these bricks. These are pretty fragile because they're fake. So to avoid cracking them, I recommend a rubber mallet. But if you think you're just gonna press them on and they're gonna stick, it's not gonna get the suction it needs. You need to give it some light tabs, and you'll see, just like vibrating concrete, how it gets the bubbles and stuff out and it settles. Giving it some light taps is gonna help it connect a lot better. Also, if it's too dry, like right now I'm in the direct sun, I'm giving it a little spray just so the moisture doesn't, or the dry brick doesn't pull all the moisture out of the mortar. So we'll give it a quick spray, both sides, as we're working these corner pieces. Lay your corners in first and then branch out from there. It's super simple. I don't even think there's any other tips there. This ain't rocket science, man. Like, slap some of this on the back of a brick, press it on, give it a little tap, and then just keep going. I have these joints in the cinder blocks are already perfectly level, so I use those to reference myself so I don't start stacking my bricks at some stupid angle, but you'd have to be pretty silly to do that. This is fun, it's easy. And then I scoop off the excess off the top. And off the bottom. Tapping it on was the trick. So something else you're gonna wanna do is come in with a stick, or you can buy one of these little tool things and just church it up in here a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect because this is all gonna get filled with more mortar. Like here, I'm just cleaning that up a little, but that's all gonna get filled later on. Looking pretty dang good. I was worried these bricks would be too skinny to my liking, but with the gap in there, looks pretty good.
The perlite I was waiting for finally showed up, so now I can pause doing the stonework and finish laying the insulated foundation. Again, this was a big error on my part. You do not want to do this in 2 pours. You got to do it all in one shot, and I recommend doing a 3-to-1 ratio of perlite to Portland cement, not a 5-to-1 like I did. The more perlite you have in there, the better heat retention and insulation properties it's going to have. So it might be worth your while doing some experiments. Another reason it may not have turned out great for me is I didn't compact it enough at the edges. You know, you'll have to make your own decision and watch some other videos, but a 3-to-1 ratio is definitely strong enough. So here, after it's set a couple days, like 1 day, took the frame off, was checking it out.
I think I got screwed by doing 2 separate pours. Maybe this stuff just hasn't fully cured. I would not recommend a 5-to-1 ratio. I would do 4-to-1 for sure. Definitely do a 4-to-1 ratio, perlite to cement, Portland cement. Some of these pieces are just pretty crumbly. Yeah, it's probably a combination of different types of perlite I use because I bought them from different places, and then doing 2 separate pours. I am not fucking happy with this. I am not happy with this. I'm having serious regrets and reservations about putting the entire foundation of the pizza oven on that. So I'm just gonna stare at this and think for a little bit. All right, after staring at it and thinking, I'm gonna destroy all this and start over. All right, I've got it demoed enough. The form is reset. I was able to salvage it. This stuff's too hard to come off. I don't know why this mixed up so hard. I don't know. I'm not messing around this time. I'm doing a 3-to-1 ratio, and instead of just Portland cement, I'm gonna do half high strength concrete, half Portland cement, and then a 3-to-1 ratio with perlite instead of 5-to-1. So we'll see how this pour goes the second time.
This go around, I was deliberate about making sure I packed it in really good in the corners. The next day I took the mold off and it looks pretty good. Much stronger, clean, crisp edges. I was very happy with how this turned out the second time, thank goodness.
All right, here we go. First pickup, 150. Not sure how many I'll need, but we're gonna start with 150 fire bricks. We'll see how it goes. Pattern looks good. That's what I'm going for. You want the herringbone pattern, so when you're sliding the pizza across, it's less likely to get caught up on a lip. If it does hit a ridge, it'll just go over it because of the angle. I've seen it done 2 ways. Guys will lay it out like this, and they'll mark on the bottom where it needs to be cut, and they'll make these cuts, so they'll have all their pieces laid out and cut, and then they'll go superimpose it onto their actual platform. That doesn't leave any room for error. I'm thinking I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stay here and stare at this and think about it for a little bit. I think it'll be a waste of time if I lay this all out, make the cuts, then go lay it. And if it's off, you know, it probably won't be because this is an exact cutout, but you know, that's like building a puzzle just to go build a puzzle again. So I think I'm just gonna start laying them and hope for the best. We'll see how it goes.
All you need to do here in terms of marking is snap a center line and then just draw a couple 45-degree angle ones off of there so you know the angle you need to set those first couple bricks on. You also want to soak them in water beforehand. You can see how porous they are. I bought the cheapest tile saw Amazon had and it worked out great. I've got it linked in the plans. Also, for your fire mortar, or your refractory mortar rather, the supplier where I got these bricks from had one bag left, so that's what I used for this part. But you'll see later on in the video I had to mix up my own, which if you guys are doing this, I just recommend you mix up your own. It's a lot cheaper, and I did find that the stuff I mixed up by myself was a lot stickier, so it was a lot easier to work with and get those bricks to stack. I'm just applying a real thin layer on the bottom just to make sure everything's level and they're set in place pretty good and they're not sliding around on me. Putting these in looks hard and complicated, but it's not. Once you get the first couple in, everything else fits into place. Just give it a little tap with a rubber mallet, and then with a pencil from the underside, just mark what the overhangs are, and then just do your custom cutting on this tile saw here.
Yeah, buddy. Look at that. That is pretty slick. Finally, something went according to plan.
And that is it for part 1 of the DIY pizza oven build video. Part 2 is up now. You can go and watch that. And if you're thinking about building one of these yourselves, I have a lesson learned video that you're definitely going to want to watch before starting. There's build plans available. I include a full list of materials, so you don't need to repeat the same mistakes I did. Thanks for watching, and if you guys have any questions about this, please comment below. I'm happy to help however I can.